Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our event tonight. My name is Susan White from the Reading League, Maryland. We are excited to partner with the University of Maryland and the Maryland Initiative for Literacy and Equity, also known as MIND, to bring you tonight's panel discussion, Moving Literacy Forward with Maryland's Multilingual Learners. I would like to thank my colleagues from the Reading League Maryland and collaborators from the University of Maryland, Dr. DJ Bolger and Dr. Drew Fagan, in planning and organizing tonight's event. I also want to welcome and extend our appreciation to our panelists from across the state of Maryland for sharing their knowledge and experience with us tonight. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. DJ Bolger. Dr. Bolger is an associate professor at the University of Maryland in the College of Education, where he is co-director of the Maryland Initiative for Literacy and Equity with Dr. Simone Gibson of Morgan State University. He also directs the Laboratory for the Development of Reading and Language. Dr. Bolger.
Thank you, Susan. So this event that's going on tonight is a wonderful event that we've been looking forward to for some time. For those of you who don't know, many of you may have been aware of Mile and been invited to some of the recent events. But the Maryland Initiative for Literacy and Equity is a joint venture between the University of Maryland and Morgan State University to combine research and professional development and education, along with outreach and policy, to really make a change in our state along the lines of language and literacy development for our children and our adults. So we are really looking to make a big impact in the state of Maryland regarding our literacy achievement and how all of our citizens can enjoy full and literate lives. So one of the things that, as tonight's discussion will show, is that we really are focused on issues of equity, and our multilingual learners are forefront in that effort. And so I would like to first and foremost thank our moderator for tonight, Dr. Drew Fagan. And just to for those of you who may or may not know Drew, I'm gonna give you a brief bio, which is way too long to read. But Dr. Fagan has been a TESOL teacher for decades, as well as a teacher educator, a researcher in higher education. He's also been in the adult educational settings as well. Dr. Fagan is the 2023 Teacher of the Year from the TESOL International Association and the National Geographic Learning. And he was also just recognized by his alma mater, Columbia University's Teachers College, for the 2023 Distinguished Alumni Early Career Award. A wonderful award and well-deserved. Many of you may know Dr. because he's the past president of Maryland TESOL and has co-authored the Maryland TESOL Handbook for Educators and English Learners, educators of English learners, should I say. He's also been a part of the Blueprint board for multilingual learners, and as well as just an incredible gem in the state to really push us forward on best practices for our multilingual learners. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Fagan. Edpin. And
thank you, DJ. I appreciate that. Decades. Wow. Okay. It's amazing how quickly it's gone by. Everyone, good evening. For those of you who are in Maryland or near Maryland, good afternoon or good morning if you're joining us from anywhere else around the world. It is such a pleasure that you're here to talk with us today at really the precipice of a change that's about to happen in our state's K-12 system regarding ensuring that our multilingual learners achieve academic success in all areas of K-12 education. Maryland has gone through quite a few changes, which we're going to talk about a bit tonight. And at the center of all of this is ensuring that every multilingual learner, inclusive of their lived experiences, their backgrounds, have the opportunities to be successful in academic settings, to be successful with their English proficiency, and also to be successful in enhancing their own home language and really bringing their linguistic repertoire to a higher level that will help them succeed in whatever they are trying to do in life, both now and in the future. Tonight, we are aimed at really trying to set the foundation for where we are today in Maryland in terms of addressing our multilingual learners' literacy needs. We are hoping that this is actually going to be the first of many in a series of virtual and potentially in-person workshops to focus on the specific needs of varied multilingual learner populations, literacy development. This is going to be the beginning, and our goal tonight is really to set up the foundational knowledge of who the multilingual learners are in our state, their varied needs, and what we are currently doing to address their needs, specifically their literacy needs. I am joined tonight by people from across the state who are connected with working with multilingual learners and their educators in varied capacities, ranging from one of our own school district's ESOL supervisors to a high school teacher, to an elementary literacy specialist, to a lead teacher, to one of the teacher educators in our flagship institution, really trying to bring everyone together who have a stake in ensuring our multilingual learner success in one location. And as all of you are aware, it's very difficult to get a lot of people from a lot of different perspectives of our field in one location. So we're very happy to have them tonight. I will introduce them individually in a little bit. You can see their names here, but I will introduce them individually in a little bit. I do want to start off by really setting the stage for everyone who are both from Maryland as well as outside Maryland to really understand who are our multilingual learners, or in some counties, they're calling them English learners. Some places call them English language learners. This is one thing about the state of Maryland, as well as many other states and many other areas around the world. How do we call these student populations? So in Maryland, different school districts still use different terms. So to try to be inclusive of everyone, for the most part, we will be saying multilingual learners, but you may also see English learners here or there because that is what many of the school districts are still utilizing. To get a pinpoint about who are Maryland's multilingual learners, let's first start off with what are the most common languages that are spoken by these students. So you can see here the top 5 languages that are currently spoken. For quite some time, these have been the top 5 languages of our multilingual learners. They're home languages or first language, depending on the term that you want to use. And it has not varied too much in terms of the top 5. However, that is quickly beginning to change, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. On the right side here, you'll be able to see all 24 school districts in the state of Maryland. Multilingual learners are represented in every single school district in the state of Maryland, ranging from around 32,000 students in Prince George's County being identified as eligible for ESOL services, English for speakers of other languages, ESOL, all the way down to 7 students total in Garrett County. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that this data coming from the Title III office of the Maryland State Department of Education is from last year. They are currently compiling this year's data, and that should be available in January. But there's already been a bit of a change with some of our school districts. So stay tuned for January for the updated version of these numbers. Now, when we are talking about our P12 English learners or multilingual learners or English language learners, the term that you want to use here, there are a couple things we need to take into account when we're talking about who they are. In 2013, 2014, we had approximately 56,000 students total in the entire state of Maryland who were identified as eligible for ESOL services. Whether or not they actually had and received ESOL services is a different story. As we know, there are some families who may choose to refuse services even if their children are eligible. But 56,000 were eligible back in 2013, 2014. Let's take a look at 2022, 2023. In less than a decade, this number has almost doubled. This is quite significant because while this number has almost doubled, the teachers who are prepared to work with them, the educators who feel confident in being able to address these students' needs, that number has not necessarily been parallel. And this is something that we want to try to address moving forward in our state. And we're going to talk about how the state is prepared to do that and how we at Mile, as well as the Reading League, want to be a part of this as well. Furthermore, when we're talking about who are Maryland's multilingual learner populations, well, they vary. They're across all grades. We have quite a few who are newcomers. And for those who are slightly older, upper elementary and older, we have some newcomers who are coming in at grade level in their home language. But we also have some newcomers who are coming in with limited or interrupted education in their home language or in their country, meaning that they're bringing different funds of knowledge to our classroom. They're bringing lived experiences that are diverse and might not be the more traditional ways that educators consider pieces of information that their students might be bringing to the classroom when they're newcomers. So this is something to take into account, that we have different groups of newcomers entering the state of Maryland. But we also have students who are what I like to term, and what has been utilized a little bit more in the research in our field, experienced multilingual learners. You may know them by a slightly older term known as long-term English learners. Experienced multilingual learners, though, really values the fact that they have varied experiences with at least their home language and English, potentially more languages as well. These students, for the most part, have spent the majority of their education in the American public school system. They have very different perspectives and lived experiences when it comes to language, when it comes to education. But when you look at all of these different populations of students, one thing that is often the case, depending on the schools or the districts or where they are, is that they all fall under this label of multilingual learner. They all fall under this label of English learner. And depending on the resources that are available, they may all be grouped into the same classroom, potentially. The key here is we need to consider differentiation because, again, all of these students bring different lived experiences to the classroom. Furthermore, in a very recent change that has happened specifically in our state has been the new refugee and immigration communities that have been entering the state of Maryland, particularly from countries and language backgrounds that have historically not been largely represented among Maryland's multilingual learner populations. From the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services 2022 report, they are based out of Baltimore. We are seeing students and families coming from Afghanistan, Burma, Syria, and Ukraine. Again, places that historically the majority of our multilingual learners in Maryland have not come from. So we are now working with new populations of multilingual learners who bring vastly diverse lived experiences, vastly diverse ways of understanding education to the classroom, different linguistic repertoires and proficiencies that our educators may not be fully knowledgeable of. So again, we're also seeing a change in Maryland with these populations fairly quickly. In general, though, we need to realize that all of our multilingual learners, they're coming from varied home languages. Historically, some of them have been well represented here, Spanish or Mandarin or Arabic or the other languages I mentioned earlier, as well as from language backgrounds that are relatively new. But we also have to realize that they also have varied backgrounds and experiences with English as well. And we need to be able to respect and bring those pieces of knowledge into our classrooms and into our schools when we are considering general workings with multilingual learners, but specifically also when we're considering literacy needs. Now, the next question is, where are our multilingual learners in the state of Maryland? Well, here's the state of Maryland. You see Baltimore. Down here, you see the DC area. Historically, and still what is the case, there is a large concentration in what I like to call the DC-Baltimore corridor. So we have Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, Howard County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, larger raw numbers of multilingual learners. But if you take a closer look at our state, you will see that our multilingual learner populations are spreading out very quickly to areas that historically have had lower raw numbers of students, if you're just taking a look at the hardcore numbers, but they're seeing drastic increases in percentages of students who are eligible for ESOL services, going out to our Eastern Shore areas, going up to Northern Maryland, Southern Maryland, and Western Maryland. This is where we're beginning to see large increases percentage-wise of our multilingual learners. Thus, we're really seeing a change truly statewide in understanding who our multilingual learners are and what they need in order to be addressed. In turn, our educators across the state need to be made aware of how to address these learners' academic, cultural, and language needs. Furthermore, if we're able to summarize all this, there are quick changes we're seeing in Maryland's demographics. Who is in Maryland in terms of multilingual learners is changing, and changing quickly. Where they are in Maryland is changing, and changing quickly. So the question comes down to, well, who can teach them? Who can work with their varied needs across the entire state? In 2022, Maryland's Blueprint for its Future had a work group on English learners in public schools. The work group worked for 2 years, and in 2022, I, being a part of the work group, and my colleagues came up with a final report of what we viewed as essential recommendations that were needed throughout the state in order to meet our multilingual learners' needs moving forward. A couple of the recommendations that came out of that has something that we are now beginning to think about statewide is historically, there have been no TESOL requirements for non-ESOL certification areas in our state. That's beginning to change in different ways. We are not a fully bilingual education state, unlike other states in our country. We do have one-way immersion programs in Frederick County. We have two-way immersion programs in Baltimore City, Montgomery County, Prince George's County. But this is not something that we're seeing statewide. And when you're looking at the second language acquisition literature, when you're looking at the biliteracy literature, the fact of the matter is that the more a student knows in their home language, the easier it is to acquire an additional language and to work through literacy needs. So this is something that's also being taken into account. Connected to that, we currently do not have bilingual teacher certification either. All of these factors, which could influence the future education of our multilingual learners significantly, are in the process of being changed. Before we go into that, though, I do want to quickly mention here a bit of data in terms of our multilingual learners being at grade level in terms of working through English literacy needs. As you can see in these two charts here, again, coming from the Multilingual Learner Education Panel and data presentation from MSDE this past June, you can see that there is a difference between all assessments. The orange are recently reclassified English learners passing, slightly higher, actually, than the whole student population. But in the blue, we're seeing those who are English learners or multilingual learners, and we're seeing the vast difference in terms of their proficiency, in terms of being at grade level for both ELA, grades 3 through 8, and English 10. Seeing this, it's not the entire picture. I don't like just looking at summative assessment data and saying, because of this, we need to address this, but it is a factor. It's something just for us to take into account as we're realizing that there is a need for being able to address our multilingual learners' literacy needs. Taking all this into consideration, the blueprint does have its recommendations that we need to think about. Of the 9 recommendations, there are 2 overarching ones I want to focus on here. Number 1 is recommendation 3, changes to the implementation of instructional programs to support our multilingual learners. The work group, again, which I was a part of, said that there were 3 overarching things we need to take into consideration for our multilingual learners moving forward in order for them to be successful. Number 1, scaling more two-way immersion programs statewide, which I briefly mentioned earlier. Number 2, literacy instruction that is aligned to the science of reading, but specifically that meets the needs of English learners. And number 3, more effective English language development programs. We'll talk about these more with our fellow panelists in just a bit. The other recommendation, which I would like to highlight here before we continue with our panelists, is recommendation number 5. Teacher preparation policies to support our multilingual learners. 5A, as opposed to defaulting all multilingual learner needs to the ESOL specialist and the ESOL specialist alone, all teachers need to be prepared to serve English learners. And if you take a look at 1, 2, and 3 below here, you can see various ways that the work group has made suggestions about that, all the while working within the parameters of certification for the state of Maryland. So trying to make it as practical as possible. 5B, pursuing bilingual teacher certification and ensuring that there are no unnecessary barriers that would limit our multilingual candidates from becoming certified teachers in Maryland. And number 3, expanding the teacher pipeline, helping the school districts grow their own, to work from within, to bring up people who are familiar with the school districts and familiar with the student populations, to have them become teachers. Taking all that background into account, the purpose of tonight's presentation is threefold. Number 1, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is one of the few opportunities where we have multiple stakeholders who are working with multilingual learners in one location. They will be able to bounce ideas off of each other, to talk with one another, perhaps ask questions of one another, in order to ensure that multilingual learners and their educators have what is needed in order to ensure future success. Number 2, it gives us an opportunity to really discuss how our different roles and our different responsibilities with multilingual learners connect with one another and actually can build off of one another in order to address specifically their literacy needs. Point 3, where can we go in the future? Making connections to the blueprint, but equally important, something which I do want to highlight, we need to understand what is happening now in real time in our school districts and in our educator development opportunities in order to be able to understand how to grow from the bottom up based on what we're already doing. This is not something that we should be reinventing the wheel for. Our educators bring their own funds of knowledge to the table. How can we grow from the foundation that we've already established? Having said that, I would like to formally introduce our panelists tonight. Tamisha Sampson, ESOL Coordinator for Howard County Public Schools. Lauren Jones, Associate Clinical Professor and the initial P12 ESOL Certification Coordinator for the University of Maryland, College Park. Karen Kay, Elementary Literacy Specialist for Prince George's County Public Schools. Ann Silva, ESOL Teacher for Wicomico County Public Schools on our Eastern Shore, and Elizabeth Phillipson, Teacher Leader for Washington County Public Schools in Western Maryland. The format for tonight is I have given everyone questions to prepare. Everyone's going to be able to talk about their responses. Some of them have shared data with us, and we will save all questions for the end of the panel. Tamisha, we are going to begin with you. Please describe the multilingual learner populations that are in Howard County.
Good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Tamisha Sampson. So Howard County is a western suburb of Baltimore, and we have 78 schools, K-12. We also have approximately 56,289 students. 4,065 students are multilingual learners. So about 7% of our population is multilingual learners, up about 2% from 3 years ago. And our top 5 languages are Spanish, Mandarin, Korean, Telugu, and Urdu. Most of our students are in the elementary grades. We have about 2,400 students in elementary, 740 in middle, and 857 MLs in our high schools. And about a third of our multilingual learners are experienced multilingual learners.
Thank you, Tamisha. To provide a little bit more context in terms of who we are working with, Lauren, please describe how pre-service teacher populations at the University of Maryland are introduced to addressing the needs of multilingual learners.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Drew. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I provide some data here because we have so many different pathways and program options, as you can imagine. So the first one is our elementary undergraduate pathway. This is our largest program in terms of numbers. It's 123 credits. One of the strongest points of this program is that there are 5 consecutive field experiences in local schools across the span of the 4 years. They do take 3 credits in a language variation and multilingualism class. They also have a 3-credit course that takes place during their full-time internship titled Culturally Responsive Language and Literacy Instruction in Elementary Classrooms. And one of my favorite parts about this program is that there is an area of emphasis, and students have TESOL as an option. And we've just recently this year rolled out a program really encouraging our students to select TESOL as their area of emphasis, and encouraging them to have that certification in ESOL as they complete the program, providing them with support for praxis and making sure they have the coursework necessary to be successful. And so that's one of our newest initiatives with that program. Our secondary K-12 and middle school undergraduate pathways are more varied, as you can imagine. Credits vary depending on the particular program, 121 to 127 credits. And these students double major in their content area and secondary education. So they have a very full schedule as far as the courses they have to take. So for instance, our students that are in social studies, they may be a history major, but then they're also a dual major in secondary ed. So they have to fulfill the content areas for both of those or the requirements for both. We do have at least 2 field experiences in local schools, though we are working to add a third. It's optional right now, but hoping to make that more permanent in the near future. And they have a 2-credit requirement to take a class on both ESOL and exceptional learners. We have an elementary master's certification pathway. The total program is 37 credits, and they take 1 credit in language variation. That's the only class they have there. And then our secondary K-12 middle school MCERT pathways vary in credits, 36 to 39 credits, with 3 credits in linguistic diversity and English learners in secondary classrooms. So that is what we're looking at. We have a lot of different programs beyond this. We do have in-service programs that really cater to supporting our teachers in classrooms already and helping them be better prepared to engage with their multilingual learners. We also have a brand new reading specialist kind of revamped program that really focuses on multilingual learners as well. So we have a lot of different initiatives going on and many different pathways where we're really trying to incorporate the focus on multilingual learners and literacy.
Thank you, Lauren. Continuing the topic of providing background in terms of how our panelists are engaging with multilingual learners and their educators, I now turn to Karen. Karen, in Prince George's County, where you currently work as an elementary literacy specialist, can you describe the multilingual learner populations that you serve and your specific role in working with them?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Fagan. Um, you can go to my slide there. Okay, so here you can see the top countries that our students of birth that our students mainly come from, and then the top languages that are spoken in Prince George's County, and as well as the race of our English language learners here. Um, we have over 107 languages that are spoken, and of course, with Spanish being nearly 90% of those. Also, when you were presenting the data from the other slide, saying that, there were about 105,000 students, I was like, whoa, like half of them are in our county. So we have quite a large number of ESOL students that reside in Prince George's County, or ELD. Sorry, our new term is English learner, English language developers. So our ELD students. Was there another slide for me, Dr. Fagan?
No, there was not.
That was it. Okay. So the ELD students do represent 25% of the total number of students in Prince George's County, and that percentage is quite high in comparison. If you, from looking at the slide that you presented earlier, our numbers were the most in the state. So my role is a elementary support teacher, literacy support teacher, is I help teachers with implementing the reading language arts program in the classroom. But last year, we were helping out with the teacher shortage. So I did serve in the role as an ESOL teacher last year. And I was in an elementary school working with first graders. Most of the schools that I am assigned as an early elementary literacy support person do have high populations of bilinguals. In our county, we can range from about 5% of bilinguals all the way up to about 95% of bilinguals, depending on, where you are in the state. So one of the major roles that I've had to take on this year is to support teachers with the shift from a balanced literacy way of teaching to a structured literacy way of teaching, to be in line with the blueprint or science of reading.
Thank you, Karen. And Karen, you brought up a great point that I just would like to reiterate for everyone. That when you brought up the term ELD, English language development, again, as I did mention earlier, across our state and across our school districts, different districts are utilizing different terms for their offices, for our students. So I am going to ask our next two panelists, just very quickly as well, in addition to answering the questions, please also tell us, what are the terms that are commonly used for these student populations where you are? So Karen, thank you very much for bringing that up. And we are going to jump from the middle of the state, from Prince George's, and elementary from Karen to Anne, who is over on our eastern shore in Wicomico County, and who is also teaching at the high school level at Wicomico High School. Anne, please describe the multilingual learner populations you serve in Wicomico County and your specific role in working with them. And also please tell us, what is the term that is used for these student populations where you are?
Absolutely, thank you. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. So the key word I would use to describe my county and my students' population growing. We are growing at an exponential rate. As you can see on the upper right hand side, compared to the statewide rate of growth, our rate of growth is just insane. We have 202 multilingual learners in my high school, Wacomico High School. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but again, as you can see, it is just growing. We're actually screening 4 more students tomorrow, so that will be 206. If you look to the left, you'll see all of the languages we have in the county. I know it's really small, but hopefully you can see it. So number 1, not very surprising that our most common L1 in the county is Spanish, but following very close behind is actually Haitian Creole. So it's notable. It's important for me to note that we do have a considerable Haitian population in Salisbury, partially due to the agricultural opportunities in the county. Lots of parents are working with Purdue and Mountaineer farms. Yes, we have a very vastly growing Portuguese population as well. Yeah. And then the word we use still, we're using English learners, ELs, but me personally, I am working my way to using ML a little more often. And then my role, I obviously, teach and support my students. I primarily push in and co-teach content area classes. But I do teach one ESOL 2 class every year. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And again, I'll be doing a little bit of commentary in between just to make connections with everybody. A couple of things. Number 1, you're already seeing between Prince George's County and Wacomico County the drastic differences in terms of, number 1, rate of growth. Prince George's has, again, the raw numbers. They have the hard numbers of 32,000. But ironically, their rate of growth is nowhere near as high as Wacomico County. Wacomico might not have the high numbers that Prince George's have, but we can see here the 17% increase compared to Prince George's and the majority of other areas in the state. Number 2, you're also going to be seeing the drastic differences in the home languages. Again, Wacomico is very unique with the very large Haitian Creole speaking student population, almost equal to the Spanish speaking English learner population. So again, you're going to begin seeing these drastic differences across the entire state. Keep in mind, how do we address everyone's unique needs across our state? Which brings us to Elizabeth. We are now jumping from the eastern shore of Maryland all the way to western Maryland in Hagerstown, and we are going to Washington County, back to elementary school. But here, Elizabeth is a lead teacher doing a lot of professional development with the in-service teachers at her school. So Elizabeth, question for you. Describe the multilingual learner population served in Washington County and your specific role in working with the in-service educators there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and for that wonderful introduction and just being here this evening. On the next slide, you'll see I stole Annie's graphic. It was beautiful. And I love that it kind of just put it in perspective, the distance and the growth of our student population here in Maryland. Historically speaking, Washington County Public Schools, although we're not as far out west as Allegheny and Garrett, a beautiful drive to get here nonetheless. We are growing. We're really, really growing. In 2021, we had 615 students. And then in 2022, it jumped to 819, which was a 33% growth, which was really awesome. This year, our latest and greatest numbers that were shared with me are 1,037. And those are continuing to rise and continuing to grow. In our communities, we have a lot of different industries that are being built. We're on the 8170 corridor. And so there's a lot of new communities and families coming in, which I think is just wonderful and such an opportunity for our schools and our educators. We have our top 5 languages here: Spanish, French, Russian, Arabic, and Ukrainian, which is pretty on par for what we're seeing across the state. Specifically, I want to talk to you a little bit about my school. I work at Bester Elementary School, and we're a city school. We are Title I, and we have a 98% poverty rate. And so we serve many unique families in a very difficult neighborhood in some ways. And they have a lot of needs. We have 483 students and active 31 students. The word is, it might be 32. No, I'm sorry, 33, because I just got the email yesterday that we're enrolling 2 more students in our building. So every day, Bester is just being the best. My role as a lead teacher is really to develop our new professionals, but also all the grade levels within our building. We do professional development, feedback sessions, we look at data. Each school in our county is blessed to have an instructional coach such as me, and at our building we get 3. And that's due to our student need and our population need. So this year we decided to divide and conquer. I get to work specifically with grade 5, kindergarten, our intervention team, and our special ed team. And I'm really glad that I got to kind of zoom in with our interventionist and our special ed, because that's where the bulk of our services and our focus on our multilingual learners is, and our efforts are going. The paraprofessionals in our building, we have 2 wonderful paraprofessionals in our building, thanks to the Maryland Ready to Read Act. So there are literacy coaches that are working. I help to maintain the student progress process for them and their schedules and their student list. We're working with our interventionist and our special ed. We are lucky enough to have 2 EL teachers. Historically, it used to be 1, and she was doing it all, pre-K to 5, and she was the gambit. So we're really excited that we have 2 in the building so they can kind of divide and conquer as well. And I think that, as a lead teacher, I kind of have a pulse on the efforts around the building in regards to literacy, and I'm really proud of where we're going. It's not always perfect. We know we have a lot of work to do, but we're getting there. We use the term ELs, but again, I love the ML, and I think that really is going to be a positive spin for our teachers and our staff to use going forward.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Again, just to reiterate, the percentage of growth you're seeing in these areas skyrocketing. You're also seeing the differences in the home languages as well across the state. And we're already seeing, again, what Elizabeth is doing to work with a variety of teachers in the school as well. So now that we have the background for all of our panelists, let's go into what's happening now in terms of working with multilingual learners, but specifically in terms of addressing their literacy needs. So let's go back to Tamisha. Again, looking at things from a macro sense at the entire school district level in Howard County, which, as she mentioned, is just slightly west of the Baltimore area. Tamisha, generally speaking, but also as it relates to literacy specifically, what have been some of the changes and challenges that Howard County has experienced with multilingual learners over the past 5 years? And what has been done at the school district level to address those?
Thank you for that question. If you could advance to the next slide. One of the things that I want to highlight from Howard County is the word collaboration. One of the things that also is important for you to know, I am newish to Howard County. I can't say new, I'll just say newish. I'm in my 3rd year. And so upon coming to Howard, one of the things that stood out to me right away was this idea that our multilingual learners who were scoring at the beginning levels of English language development weren't being seen by reading specialists. And so that prompted conversations at the district level about why, and, is it possible for us to think about this a little differently? And so that was one of the first challenges that was encountered. And through lots of conversation and collaboration at the school level with my counterparts at the district level in our reading office, and also working with reading specialists at schools, and really bringing together some understanding around structured literacy and what that means for all students, but specifically for multilingual learners, and what is English language development? What does that look like? And what are the commonalities with both structures? And so we're still working through that. But for us, it really is all about bringing together the literacy department and the ESOL department centrally, but also at schools, so that we can have a shared understanding about what our MLs need. And also having this assets-based approach, understanding that our students are bringing assets. They're coming with diverse linguistic and cultural needs. And we want to elevate those and use those as we provide support to our students. Next slide, please. Some of the things that for all students, this idea of limited foundational literacy skills for students is one thing, but really understanding the linguistic backgrounds of our students and helping not just the ESOL teachers, but classroom teachers, administrators understand that it's important for our students to be able to make meaning as they are growing their literacy and making those connections, because as students are acquiring language, additional language, they're looking at the world around them to try to make sense of it. So as we're thinking about teaching them foundational skills, we want to make sure it's done in context so that they can make those connections, right? And so that's the work that we are currently doing. We are providing professional learning across the district. And we also are really pushing for that oral literacy. We want to ensure that our students are using language to communicate as they are acquiring additional language.
Thank you, Tamisha. Just two things that I thought that you said that also resonated with what Elizabeth and Karen, what they were all saying as well, is this notion of cross-disciplinary work, how you're working with all the different offices at the school district level in order to ensure the success, but also the connection with oracy, which goes back to the fact that we have different student populations, some of whom bring academic literacy knowledge in from their home language that they can utilize, but some of them who have minimal to no academic literacy from their home language, but they have successful oracy that we're able to work with. And I think very often educators and school districts don't realize that that's actually such an asset that our students with limited or interrupted formal education can actually bring to the context. So thank you for bringing up oral language and oracy. I think that's so important to do. So thank you for that. Switching now to teacher education, specifically working with our pre-service teachers. Lauren, what are the current challenges and barriers with teacher preparation in Maryland as it relates to multilingual learners in general and as it relates to literacy specifically?
Sure. So I think one of our major challenges and obstacles is one that many teachers in the classroom face, and that's a lack of time, right? Our students are in pathways and programs that, our undergraduates are in a 4-year pathway. There's just not the space that we wish there was to expand the coursework that's focused specifically on our multilingual learners. We've made some really focused changes in embedding instruction that meets the needs of multilingual learners in our coursework, but to have courses exclusively focused on multilingual students is very challenging for us. I find it extremely challenging, especially for our secondary K-12 middle school programs that are the dual majors. We just have had a really challenging time finding space to fit in more coursework. What this does is it underprepares our students to go out into the classrooms where they will undoubtedly have multilingual students in their classes. But it also, I think, serves to kind of reinforce the stigma that ESOL teachers are the only ones responsible for the instruction of these students. And that is just not the case. We face a major teacher shortage, and many ESOL positions are left vacant. And so while you may have someone that in theory will push into your classroom, if the position is vacant, you will not. And it will be on you as the classroom teacher of record to support those students. So we really need to make more, I guess, progress in fitting in additional courses and to revamping the courses that we're already providing and making sure that we have that specific focus on multilingual learners. Because unfortunately, good teaching is not all that our multilingual students need. They need focused instruction that is responsive to their needs. And so that's why that really particular coursework is so key. And so we're really kind of grappling with that challenge and looking to find solutions collaboratively with program coordinators to see what we can do to embed more of this coursework and more of this content in our programs.
Lauren, having said that, the notion of revamping courses, I think, is something that a lot of higher education institutions are contending with due to the fact that we are restricted to the limits in terms of credits that we are allowed to have in these programs and the other requirements that are required for us at the state. Going back to what I just said to Misha earlier, the notion of cross-disciplinary work at the higher education level. How can we get our professors and other instructors in institutions of higher education to actually work together in order to revamp these courses that are already in existence, that are already on the books, that are already part of these certification programs, to be not just surface-wise focusing on multilingual learners, but to really get into the depths of doing that as well. So again, that notion of cross-disciplinarity is something that is so needed, even when we're talking about teacher education. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Karen, moving back to Prince George's County, what is working well with addressing your elementary multilingual learners' needs in general, and specifically as it relates to literacy?
Okay, so I think that what is working well in Prince George's County right now is that we have started that shift into the science of reading or to structured literacy. But we're a big district and there are a lot of challenges with that. But we did have a science of reading, like a workshop, like a conference at the beginning of the school year. It was 2 full days. It was a great conference. The conference address the 5 pillars of reading, but it also incorporated our multilingual learners as well as, SPED and early childhood and science and social studies, all of those, and as well equity was rolled into that as well. We're not just limiting our thinking to that reading only occurs during the reading English language arts block. And I thought that conference was really a great way that we got started. The other thing that I'd like to highlight that I think we have started to do well, although it's very tough, is dealing with equity in our county. The superintendent that we had would hold book studies on anti-racism and implicit bias. And our county has done, county-wide PDs, watching videos. And I have to mention that the video that we watched last year was triggering for quite a number of people, but I do believe that it opened a lot of individuals' eyes to some of the trauma that our multilinguals experience coming into this country and what they have to deal with once they get here. So although there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, I think it is great that we have started to have those conversations.
I couldn't agree more, Karen. The fact that these conversations are beginning to happen is so essential. 2 things that you mentioned, which really stuck out at me as something that was important. Reading is not just for the ELA block. That is so true. And that is something which has been highlighted in the blueprint, as well as in the work group on English learners in public schools final recommendation. Literacy is curriculum-wide. Literacy is across all grades. It is not solely ELA elementary. This is something that's continuously throughout the entire educational system. And it's something that teachers of all content areas, it's going to take a bit of time to grasp that everyone is a literacy teacher. So Karen, thank you for saying that as well as the notion of equity and just having all educators be aware of what our multilingual learners experience, not just defaulting to let the ESOL specialist handle it. All educators do that. So thank you for that. Similar question, Anne, what is working well with addressing your secondary multilingual learners' needs in general, and specifically as it relates to literacy?
Okay. So in Wycomico County, we've recently adopted Ventures by Cambridge as our curriculum. This is our second year working with it. It's a collection of textbooks, workbooks, and online resources that feature thematic units, and they're mostly skills-based. Overall, I think it's been pretty successful with our ESOL classes specifically. I've found that having thematic units allows for a more genre-based approach to literacy teaching. I find myself kind of assigning genres to each theme and allowing time for students to become familiar with these genres as they stand alone before introducing new genres. Working within these genres allows me to adopt a more zoomed-in approach to literacy teaching. So I'm able to really focus on what makes a genre, focusing on these details and working with one kind of group of texts at a time makes reading and writing more accessible to my students specifically, because it allows them to kind of become familiar with and practice using English language conventions in isolation. So, students are able to, or they're free to practice, for example, passive voice before they're expected to pair that with other academic conventions, if that makes sense.
Annie, I personally beamed when you said a genre approach because I love genre analysis, and my background a long time ago was genre analysis. And taking a genre-based approach for both reading and writing is such a unique thing and something that you can argue you can do across the grade levels, but particularly in secondary ed. Something that I think we're going to see more and more across the entire state and beyond. Elizabeth, from what you've seen and discussed as a teacher leader back out in Hagerstown, what is working well with teachers at your school addressing multilingual learners' needs in general, and specifically as it relates to literacy?
Yeah. So what's really going well, I think, is that we kind of jumped in and jumped on that science of reading gravy train early. And I'm really proud not only of WCPS, but of my staff. We're really looking and making sure that our instructional practices are grounded in systematic, explicit foundational skills, and that we're putting complex text in front of our students regardless of their proficiency level. And we're believing that we're going to use the supports and scaffolds to get our students to access that. It's required every every staff member engage in this learning. At my building, we had about 95% completion of the modules and the coursework that was given. And I think because we're all speaking the same language and we have the same expectation across the board, we're really kind of coming in with a very targeted approach of what literacy means to our students, but specifically then what it looks like for our specialized groups. I was really lucky because I got to kind of lead this effort at my building. We would take 2 modules at a time. We paid our staff to have additional time to digest it, own it, make it part of who they were as an educator and the reason and the research behind it. We incorporated it into our collaborative planning times. So I think because we had the why in the research, then it was easy as we started to lift and shift. Our second lift and shift came when we got a new core resource, CKLA, which is going over really well with our county and at the elementary level. Tons of really supplemental support, great aids built-in scaffolds and supports. There's explicit sections and sidebars on each of the teacher resources that says this is how you can help a multilingual learner. And it's so encouraging because in the past it was kind of like, oh yeah, you might have an EL student in front of you, but here we are planning ahead, right? And I love it because I think that our county is being proactive instead of reactive. We also opted into buying 2 supplemental intervention programs that align with that core resource with EL students in mind. And I think that was a good move on our part because we know that we need it. At our school, we're diving in even deeper, and I'm really proud, and I'm going to toot my own horn here because I was an EL teacher for many years. And I said, guys, we got to co-teach. We got to co-plan. We got to bridge the transferable skills between the content and what I'm doing in my ESOL classroom. And I'm super proud because our staff is doing a great job with it. Again, we have 2 EL staff members, but we also have 5 interventionists and multiple special ed paraprofessionals and educators, support staff in our building who are taking this approach of co-planning and co-teaching. And I think that it is not only giving confidence to our students because we're all using the same language, we're engaging in tier 1 with, deeply, richly well. They're gaining confidence, but also our teachers are gaining confidence because now they know what to do. They know how to help that newcomer because they have that time together to really collaborate. And I really hope it just grows our students. Also, we joke at Bester, even though Bester is the top of the alphabet, we're usually the bottom of data. So I'm already seeing some growth. And we're using a standard, in Washington County, we use a standard screener, the DIBBLS assessment, which aligns with our core resource, the CKLA resources. It looks specifically at phonemic awareness, fluency, and comprehension. And I think now, because we're all using the same kind of litmus across the board, we're going to see those patterns. We're going to be more reactionary and be ready to look at our data and say, well, this intervention and this model's working, but this one isn't, and why? And I'm really excited because I think that it's just going to bolster our student achievement, fingers crossed, as they go into the end of the school year.
I love the enthusiasm that you have and what's going on in your school. Collaboration, co-teaching, co-planning. This is actually all connected to what's already said in the blueprint as well. So your school's already doing that, among many other schools that are doing this. So we have to give credit to that. But I think my favorite quote of yours is proactive versus reactive. And that's the change that's now happening in Maryland. Many schools across the state are now realizing that they have to do that. And it's not just in connection to the blueprint. This actually goes back to the Every Student Succeeds Act state plan from 2018. I was also a part of implementing that. This is something where all teachers, it's explicitly said, all teachers are responsible for multilingual learners' academic achievement and language proficiency. So everyone needs to be proactive in ensuring that, not just looking back and saying, oh, we should consider this based on what we've already seen. So thank you for highlighting that. Let's now talk about the future. So we talked about the past, where we are, the present, what's happening now. Let's talk about the future. Going back to the school district level, Tamisha, how are school districts across Maryland and in Howard County specifically moving literacy forward for multilingual learners in connection to the blueprint for Maryland's future?
Well, when I talk about the blueprint with many of my colleagues across the state, a lot of us are doing some similar things, as Elizabeth stated, co-teaching focused on planning, instruction, and assessment in a way where classroom teachers, ESOL teachers are collaborating. Howard, one of the things that I mentioned is that I was newer to the district, and one of the things that I needed to know when I got there was, how are we doing with our English language development programming? Are our students moving through the language proficiency levels? Are they exiting at the appropriate rate? And so coming in with a lot of those questions, we put together some data in the form of a data wall that all schools now have. And this allows us to really see where our students are. As an example, one of the things that we monitor is how our multilingual learners are doing in reading in grade 3. Are they above, on, or below grade level? So that's one of the ways that we are really monitoring where our students are. From there, we have and will continue to put in place some professional learning for teachers, but also principals and leaders. One of the things that we are doing, I think, a little differently than other districts, we are fortunate enough to have principal and assistant principal cohorts, and the focus on learning is on ESOL. So principals and assistant principals can choose the cohort that they want to learn about for the year. And our focus is on how to lead an English language development program. And that aligns with the blueprint. And we really focus on those standards, those learning standards and language expectations that our students need to know and be able to do by the end of either the year or the grade level band. And really providing tools for leaders on what to look for and how to identify when our students are receiving instruction at the grade level standard, no matter their language proficiency level, and what scaffolds can be put in place in order for them to meet those standards. So that's some of the work that we have put in place. We have also had a targeted focus on our long-term or experienced multilingual learners. And so all schools have that data in real time on our data wall, who the students are, how long they have been receiving services with us, and providing targeted professional learning for staff members across our schools on what it means to teach an experienced multilingual learner. So that's some of the work that we have been doing, and we have a lot of people that have really bought into that and really want to participate. Finally, we have hired English language development coaches. And so we have a coach at the elementary, middle, and high school, and they work at 2 schools each. And their focus is to work with classroom teachers, not necessarily ESOL teachers, in order to provide them with the tools that they need so that they can meet the needs of MLs in their classrooms. We know that our multilingual learners are with classroom teachers more than they're with ESOL teachers or specialists. And so the role of the ELD coach is really to provide that targeted professional learning, that coaching, that shoulder-to-shoulder coaching and modeling of instruction for our general ed teachers. They also are part of the school improvement planning team. And they support with school improvement planning. And so that's some of the way that we are utilizing our Title III funds and our Blueprint funds. But really, it's all about focusing on the leaders, the classroom teachers, and the ESOL teachers, and making sure that we all have a shared understanding of what it means to have and build a strong English language development program across the schools.
Misha, I was beaming when you were talking about the cohorts. I think that's fantastic to really take into account the administrators. As we know, our teachers come up against what I call the administrator ceiling, when administrators are not prepared with how to address their learners' needs at the macro scale. I'm thrilled to hear that you have these cohorts going with the principals and assistant principals and the ELD coaches for the classroom teachers, not necessarily for the ESOL teachers. Very innovative, and really, again, talking about that cross-disciplinary connection to help people think outside of the box in terms of how to address these multilingual learners' needs. Thank you for everything you've been doing at the school district level, and looking forward to seeing how things progress in Howard. Thank you. Lauren, moving on to teacher preparation. How do you see teacher preparation changing to support moving literacy forward for multilingual learners in Maryland, particularly as it connects to the Blueprint for Maryland's Future?
Sure. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that I highlighted from the MSDE implementation plan guidance document, some different pieces of the of the blueprint that are particularly focused on our multilingual students. So the first one requires us to develop and implement a structured literacy policy that incorporates effective English language development practices to improve reading outcomes for ELs. And I think this is going to have implications across contexts, but for us at the university level as well, in working with our pre-service teachers and exposing them to a range of literacy approaches and practices with a really big focus on what works well for our multilingual students and how we can make sure that their needs are being met with an approach that may not be designed for them or maybe wasn't designed with them at all in mind, right? Which is what we might be currently facing. The next piece relates to developing resources, curricula, and instructional materials across all content areas. And this goes back to what I referenced earlier in talking about how the stigma gets passed down that it's just ESOL teachers that focus on the needs of our multilingual students, when that's just not the case, right? So this would require us to be really intentional with our students across content areas to make sure that they have multilingual students at the forefront of their mind and that they're planning for those scaffolds in that differentiation and how their instruction will cater to the needs of all of their students, including their multilingual learners. The next piece will require all educator preparation programs to provide training in EL-related teacher competencies, which is a great move. I'd love to see our coursework expand in any way that it can with a focus on multilingual learners. Obviously, I'm biased, right, because of my area, but I'm really hopeful that we'll find some space for more of that, especially with the call coming from the blueprint. The next piece is related to clinical opportunities. I can say that our programs are very intentional about placing our students in diverse settings with students from a range of backgrounds, including multilingual learners. So this isn't an area necessarily that I think we particularly need to improve on because we are so intentional about this already. But it is something that we will be making sure that our partner schools and where we are placing our students do indeed have our multilingual students in them. The next piece is about dual certification offerings. I'm proud to say that here at UMD, we have a dual language PBC. We are the only institution in the state that has that offering right now. And we'd love for that to expand as we are hopeful that Maryland will be adopting a bilingual teacher certification, which is the next bullet point. So we hope to expand our coursework in that area even more with the blueprint kind of recommending all of these pieces. So I'm really hopeful about the future of teacher preparation as it relates to supporting our multilingual students. And I think that we're moving in the right direction and our focus really on making additional improvements to make sure our students have the support they need.
And that's the key thing when we're talking about teacher preparation, Laura, ensuring that the students do have those supports in order to go and help our multilingual learners be successful wherever they may end up in the state of Maryland. And that's something that is so key. And it's great just seeing how University of Maryland, among many of our other colleagues at the other institutions of higher education, are beginning to adapt to what the blueprint's recommendations have been. And it will be very interesting to see where our institutions of higher education are with teacher preparation within the next 5 years as the blueprint gets rolled out. So thank you so much for that. All right. Again, looking towards the future in terms of addressing our multilingual learners' needs, specifically their literacy needs. Karen, in Prince George's County, what do you feel needs to be amplified more to further help your elementary multilingual learners meet their literacy and general academic achievement in the schools, as well as their language proficiency?
Okay, so one thing that I think really needs to be amplified is professional development, because the professional development days are limited, and I think teachers can really benefit from more time to understand the needs of the multilingual learner. The professional development can have an emphasis on oral language development, vocabulary, the background knowledge, all of those things that are essential for our multilingual learners, so that it's just, to me, it's important that teachers aren't just necessarily up there reading a curriculum or following a curriculum, but they know what these kids need. they understand that because the needs of the multilingual learners may not be necessarily embedded within the curriculum. And I really think that professional development would be more time with professional development. But, as I mentioned before, we are a large district and we have a lot of challenges training everyone. And, even with rolling out the science of reading curriculum, we have principals that are learning right alongside with teachers right now. So it's as we often have heard, this is not a race, but a marathon. And so, but I really think that that is something that we can really look forward to, is more professional development, and even possibly having some strategies embedded within the curriculum to help teachers when they're teaching.
I appreciate how you're talking about the embeddedness within the curriculum, and currently how we're not seeing much in terms of multilingual learners. So helping our educators, and I use the term educators because it's teachers, but it's also paraprofessionals, it's administrators, going back to what Tamisha was saying earlier. It's everyone who's engaging with multilingual learners in educational settings. There's notion of professional development to ensure that everyone truly understands who these students are from an asset-based perspective, and also understanding the fact that we all have responsibilities in ensuring that these students are successful, regardless of the title that we hold within the school. And that's something which is key. And you're talking about the rollout of the science of reading. I think it's very important for everyone here tonight to understand that, yes, the science of reading is directly mentioned in the blueprint. However, it is rolling out. So not everybody in all areas of the state at all grade levels is familiar with the science of reading yet, or has begun to incorporate it yet. So that is something which is currently happening. Karen, thank you so much. Let's move on to Eastern Shore. Anne, what do you feel needs to be amplified more to further help your secondary multilingual learners meet their literacy and general academic achievement in the schools, as well as their language proficiency?
Okay. So I struggled a little bit thinking about how I wanted to answer this question. As we know, teachers can be a little needy, and rightfully so. And on top of that, Wicomico County, I believe, has a comparatively young, developed ESOL department. So while I think we're doing a great job, there have been some growing pains. What I would really like to discuss is the need for just more ESOL teachers. We have 5 ESOL teachers at Wicomico High School. Each of us has at least 35 students or more on our caseloads, and there's not enough supports available for content classes. So while we're pushing in to one class, we know that there's another class out there that really needs support, but none of us are available to give that support. And unfortunately, our students may be kind of struggling because of that. And we do what we can, but sometimes, just 2 hands aren't enough. But instead of focusing on that, I will focus on what I see as the most immediate need I have in the classroom, just for the sake of the time I have here. And that is more off-screen learning opportunities, which might sound a little weird. I am a big advocate for time away from the screen. I've seen our students have just really begun to rely on online resources such as Google and even AI. I've seen a little bit of that to do their work for them. Very often I have discussions with students about copying, pasting information from the internet and claiming that as their own work. While, these resources can be very beneficial, not all of these students use them responsibly. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some students, teenagers are teenagers, maybe they just don't care. They just, they want to get the work done and they're not really concerned with how they get that work done. I've had students come to me for screening and I hand them their laptop for the screener, and it's the first time they've opened a laptop. So there's a lot of reasons for these things. Um, I think having more offline resources would be very beneficial. I very rarely use technology other than, my overhead projector in my ESOL classes. I find that my students are more engaged when completing work that is in front of them, that they can touch, like manipulatives, pencil and paper writing, tangible texts, that it's rarely unsuccessful in my experience. So what I would really like to see is just, I guess, more strategies, more techniques to integrate offline learning in the content area classroom, because that's really where I see a lot of students leaning on, not so great ways to find their answers. So yeah, that's what I think.
Annie, wow, offline work. I think that's something which we've lost about with the increase of technology and just the connections. And you're actually seeing successes with students, with their engagement with academics and language, doing offline work, going back to tangibles, almost going back to methods 101 in this way. I think that's fantastic. At the same time, you also mentioned how we have to focus on digital literacy, students who have never even opened up a laptop before, and how to engage them with that. And then something which you brought up about AI and what you're beginning to see already with your multilingual learners, I think it goes back to a larger topic, which I haven't seen much engagement with yet. A couple of people have started looking at this from a research perspective, at least. Multilingual learners learning about ethics in literacy development, particularly in K-12 settings. So some of you out there, you may have a research topic to focus on in the future. I am seeing a bit of that with higher education. I haven't seen much about that with K-12, so I'm curious to see how that's engaging. So thank you, Annie. Elizabeth, you have the final question for tonight, going back out to Washington County. What do you feel needs to be amplified more to further help the in-service teachers in your school better meet their multilingual learners' literacy and general academic achievement in the schools, as well as their language proficiency?
Yeah, just kind of echoing a lot of the same needs around the state, a lot of the things that have already been mentioned. But definitely, I would love to see more support and continual resources for the co-teaching model. As mentioned, oftentimes, I'll just call the ESOL teacher, she'll take care of it. In our building, oftentimes I hear walking for our two EL teachers to come to the front office to support a family with language services. And that's pulling them away from that academic opportunity that they have with their students. So just having more opportunities for everyone to feel empowered in the literacy development of that child, I think is going to just move our students forward. That shoulder to shoulder, I love that phrase. I'm going to steal it. I'm going to take it because I think that that is how we're going to give our teachers the confidence to step into the role. I know that our teachers don't have the training. We have some teachers that have been in for a while and they take the classes that they need to stay with us. But, I love to see them maybe break out of what they're comfortable with and start doing some more training around servicing EL students. We have the terrific trio at CS, our central office, but we have one content special director and two lead teachers, and they do as much as they can to offer training to both our content teachers and our ESOL teachers. There's only so much time in a day, and there's only so many hours and so many credits they can offer. So I'd love to see more leadership time and opportunities to grow the opportunities that are offered to our staff. I think at Bester, our staff is like, yeah, of course I want to know how to serve and work with MLs because we have the population. We're not the largest elementary, but right next door down the road, they are. And so they're taking a really targeted approach. But in some of our outer lying communities where maybe there's only 2 or 3 kids, maybe it's out of sight, out of mind. And I don't think that that's going to get our students where they need to go. And I would love to see, back to what I said before, let's take a proactive approach instead of a reactionary approach. Also thinking about beyond the classroom, those wraparound services that we can offer students. We need more bilingual counselors, health professionals, support staff. We have an international welcome center We have a coordinator and 2 paraprofessionals. They are enrolling students all the time, but not just enrolling and working with them, getting them into the school, but they're connecting them with our community services. They're getting them glasses. They're helping them fill out vaccination forms. It's 3 ladies. And as amazing as they are, they can't do it all. We need to really think about and be decisive of how we're cultivating the community so that we can better serve our families. I think I read somewhere that about 76% of Washington County public school students end up staying in Washington County. So I would love to know, what are our next steps to build our students? They are going to be the future workers and leaders in our community. So how are we empowering our current MLs to become the leaders in our community and in our education system? So I just think across the board, just a collective effort towards the development is going to really move us here in Washington County.
Wraparound services and family engagement are so necessary. And all of our teachers here are aware of the importance of family in terms of ensuring academic success, the engagement of community, particularly with our multilingual learners. But Elizabeth, you focusing on that is something which is so necessary. And I think people may forget about that, particularly if they're outside of our field, that this is something which all students need, but particularly our multilingual learners. And also realizing that for all of us in Maryland, Elizabeth is exemplifying that with Washington County, but for everyone in Maryland, the more successful our Maryland multilingual learners are in P12, the more successful we will have people who are in Maryland to help the state overall. So I'm really happy that you said that. Everyone, I am looking at the time. We are almost out of time already. That was our final question. I had a couple of takeaways to take away from what everyone said, but I actually utilized my time in the middle of everyone's talking to give a bit of commentary for that. But one thing which I just want to say is that this was an opportunity for educators from Howard, Prince George's, Wicomico, Washington County, as well as higher education to come together and just talk about what's actually happening and the drastic differences that are happening, but the differences do not have to be that different. The biggest takeaway I would like to take from this is cross-state engagement in venues such as this, is just talk about what everyone is doing to help us think outside of our own boxes in terms of how to address our multilingual learners' needs, to help us think about different ways that we may not have considered at all. A colleague in Salisbury might be able to talk to a colleague in Hagerstown, might be able to talk to a colleague in Upper Marlboro, might be able to talk to a colleague in Columbia about how to really engage with one another and what are they doing and what could I do as well. So DJ and Susan, I'm not sure if we have time for audience Q&A. I will let you guys decide that right now. I see it's 8:28. DJ and Susan, what do you think?
So there was just one or two questions that many questions were answered in the chat. So at this point, I know there are questions about why are duolingual English-Spanish schools not giving Spanish acquisition exams to students who are learners of Spanish as a second language. So only English learners are being evaluated, and there's a version of WIDA in Spanish.
Yes, there is a version of WIDA in Spanish. I have just been studying that, and I'm not sure who wrote that. I might have an idea who wrote that in there. But yes, there is one. I completely agree. I would love to have colleagues from the Maryland State Department of Education here to address that. I think that would be something for future reference. But yes, I don't see any reason why that couldn't proceed. But I would be curious to see what our colleagues at the Maryland State Department of Education would say about that. So I don't want to speak for them. But yes, I personally agree.
Yes, sir.
And I think, otherwise, to the leaders of this amazing panel, Sandra, I could have Sandra. Sandra, do you want to ask your question in person?
Sure thing. I thank you so much for your leadership. My big question is, what PD coaching and guidance are your districts or schools providing teachers to have a balance between explicit systematic instruction on basic skills, which is extremely needed, and the language dialogue comprehension work around connected, complex, culturally relevant text that we need for dual language learners. I just spent some time in some classes this week, and I'm seeing 90% of the block being focused on phonics skills and phonemic awareness, which are important, but we're leaving some things behind. So I'm curious about how you're addressing those imbalances, if you're seeing them, and what guidance and support you're providing teachers so that we have a more integrated block. Since balance came out, it's not fashionable not to say balance, but more integrated block.
I'll speak to that one really quickly. Just from my perspective, it really depends on the level. In our schedule, we have a specific skills block for our pre-K to 2 grades. Kind of following along with Scarborough's rope in grades 3 through 5, it just is kind of married together, and they have what's called a knowledge block. And we remind our teachers, knowledge is exposure, but skills is mastery. And so in the pre-K to 2 in our system, we're really honing in on how we can use that to move literacy. And I don't want to say that in the pre-K to 2 there's no knowledge time, because there is, but we really emphasize it in the younger years. So I think to answer your question, it's a little bit about where in the day and what grade level you would be coming in to see is where you might see a different emphasis.
I think for the sake of time, Sandra, I think that's a fantastic question. I think it's a bit of an in-depth question. So one thing which we might want to do is here's everybody's contact information. Sandra, I would actually suggest that you contact Tamisha, Karen, and Elizabeth just to get more in-depth information. So you can also compare across the school district, since all of them are from different school districts. I'd be very curious to see if their own personal perspectives in the school districts as well as their grades might provide a different answer that you're looking for. I would like to thank the panelists for being here tonight. Tamisha, Lauren, Karen, and Elizabeth, thank you so much for providing us with the foundational knowledge of where we are today in terms of addressing multilingual learners' literacy needs across the state. Lauren, thank you so much for telling us about what's going on with teacher education across the state as well, and for giving us an insight into where our school districts and institutions of higher education could be going in relation to the blueprint, but also in relation to the real-time changes that these educators are seeing on the ground. As I mentioned earlier, this is just going to be the first of hopefully a series of events, either virtual, in person, or hybrid, that will be honing in on Maryland's multilingual learner needs in terms of literacy. The purpose of tonight was to be foundational, to find out where we are today. In the future, we will be holding more events that will be focusing on more specific areas for us to consider to focus on. So again, on behalf of me and the panel, we would like to thank all of you for being here, but we're not done just yet. Susan and DJ?
Yes, I want to again say thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We hope you've enjoyed the rich information and the lively discussions. I am from the Reading League Maryland. Our nonprofit organization focuses on raising awareness and providing professional development opportunities in the area of structured literacy. So if you would like to learn more about our organization and some of our future events, we encourage you to check out our website. We are also, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter, where we also advertise our upcoming events. Dr. Bolger?
Sure. In Maryland, Mile has lots of things coming up. And as Drew mentioned, hopefully we'll be having a series of events on multilingual learners. In conjunction with the Reading League and with potentially the State Department of Education. In addition to that, Mile has several events coming up. One, Drew, you can go to the next page, is tomorrow, where we are partnering with Strong Schools Maryland to talk about the blueprint for Maryland's future. And so look for more information of events from Mile coming up. So yes, I highly encourage people to please go to the Mile site. Please go to the Reading League Maryland site. Send your support and look for upcoming events.
And with that, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It was a pleasure having you all here. And we look forward to seeing you at future events focusing on multilingual learners, but also other general events focusing on literacy in and around Maryland. Everyone, have a good night. Take care.